Long before fried chicken became famous around the world, long before fast food restaurants spread across America, one humble dish quietly fed generations of Southerners. Its name was Hoppin John. Today, many Americans only encounter it once a year, usually on New Year's Day. But there was a time when this simple meal of rice and black-eyed peas appeared on tables throughout the South on a regular basis. To understand why, we need to travel back more than 200 years. The story begins along the coastal regions of South Carolina and Georgia, where rice became one of the most important crops in colonial America. The success of those rice plantations depended heavily on agricultural knowledge brought from West Africa. Many enslaved Africans arrived with generations of experience cultivating rice and preparing meals using grains and legumes. Over time, their cooking traditions blended with local ingredients and European influences, creating some of the foundations of Southern cuisine. Hoppin John emerged from that cultural exchange. The recipe was remarkably simple: rice, black-eyed peas, salt pork or bacon, sometimes onions, sometimes a few spices. Nothing expensive, nothing complicated, yet simplicity was exactly what made it valuable. Throughout the 19th century, much of the South remained rural. Many families worked farms, often spending long days outdoors in difficult conditions. Meals needed to be affordable, filling, and capable of feeding large households. Hoppin John accomplished all three. Rice provided energy. Black-eyed peas supplied protein and nutrients. Salt pork added flavor and calories. Together, they created a meal that could sustain hard-working families without costing a fortune. Following the Civil War, the dish became even more important. The South faced enormous economic challenges. Farms had been destroyed. Communities struggled to rebuild. Many households found themselves living with very limited resources. Under those circumstances, practical food mattered more than ever. Black-eyed peas were relatively easy to grow. Rice remained widely available in many regions. The ingredients could be stored for long periods and prepared in large quantities. For countless families, meals like Hoppin John helped bridge the gap between hardship and survival. But the dish offered something else as well: hope. Over time, a tradition developed across much of the South. Families began eating Hoppin John on New Year's Day. According to popular folklore, the black-eyed peas represented coins and prosperity. Rice symbolized abundance. Eating the dish at the beginning of the year was believed to bring good fortune during the months ahead. Whether people truly believed the superstition is difficult to say. What matters is that the tradition endured. Generation after generation continued serving the same meal, connecting the present with the past. Today, Hoppin John remains one of the most recognizable dishes in Southern food history. Not because it was extravagant, not because it was fashionable, but because it represents something much deeper: a story of resilience, a story of cultural exchange, and a reminder that some of America's most important foods were created not in luxury, but through necessity, perseverance, and the determination to make the most of whatever ingredients were available. For generations of Southerners, Hoppin John was more than a meal. It was a symbol of survival. And perhaps that is why it continues to be remembered long after so many other dishes have faded from memory. Today, chicken bog is known mostly in parts of South Carolina, but there was a time when this humble dish was one of the most practical meals a Southern family could prepare. Unlike many famous Southern foods, chicken bog was never designed to impress anyone. It wasn't served at luxurious banquets. It wasn't created by wealthy chefs. Instead, it came from ordinary people trying to feed large groups with whatever ingredients they had available. Its unusual name often surprises modern listeners. The word bog refers to the texture of the rice. Unlike fluffy rice dishes where every grain remains separate, chicken bog was intentionally moist and slightly sticky. As the chicken slowly cooked, the rice absorbed the broth, creating a rich and hearty meal capable of feeding an entire household. The dish became especially popular in the PD region of South Carolina. This part of the state was filled with forests, rivers, swamps, and rural farming communities. Life could be difficult. Families often lived far apart, and people depended heavily on one another during times of hardship. Large gatherings were common. Church events, harvest celebrations, community meetings, family reunions. Whenever dozens of people needed to be fed, chicken bog became an obvious choice. The ingredients were simple: chicken, rice, onions, a few seasonings. Sometimes sausage was added if a family could afford it. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive. Yet together, these ingredients created something comforting and filling. For many Southerners, that mattered far more than sophistication. One large pot could feed an entire crowd. As the dish slowly simmered, the aroma spread throughout the gathering place. Children played nearby. Adults shared stories. Neighbors exchanged news. The meal itself became part of the social fabric of rural Southern life. Food has always been more than nutrition, and chicken bog is a perfect example. It brought people together. It transformed simple ingredients into a shared experience. It reminded communities that even difficult times felt easier when faced together. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, economic uncertainty remained common across much of the South. Many farming families lived modest lives. Crop failures could create serious hardship. Natural disasters occasionally devastated entire communities. Under such conditions, practical recipes became essential. Chicken bog survived because it worked. It was affordable, reliable, and flexible. Families could adjust the recipe depending on what ingredients were available. If money was tight, fewer ingredients could be used. If times were better, additional meat and seasonings could be added. The dish adapted to circumstances, just like the people who cooked it. As years passed, newer foods began appearing across the South. Restaurants became more common. Transportation improved. National food brands entered local markets. Many traditional recipes slowly disappeared, yet chicken bog managed to survive, partly because of its connection to community traditions. Even today, South Carolina hosts festivals dedicated to the dish. Cooking competitions attract visitors from across the region. Large pots of chicken bog continue feeding crowds much like they did generations ago. That endurance says something important. Many forgotten foods vanished because they served a temporary purpose. Chicken bog endured because it became part of local identity. It tells the story of rural communities, of church gatherings, of hard-working families stretching simple ingredients as far as possible. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that some of the most meaningful meals in American history were never expensive or glamorous. They were created by ordinary people. People who understood that food was about bringing others together. In a world that often changes rapidly, chicken bog remains a rare connection to that simpler past. A humble Southern meal that helped build communities,
one pot at a time.
When most Americans think about traditional pies, one dessert immediately comes to mind: pumpkin pie. For generations, it has been closely associated with autumn, Thanksgiving, and family gatherings. But there was a time when another pie competed for that same place on Southern tables. A pie that many Americans have never even heard of today: Cushaw Pie. The story begins with a remarkable plant known as the Cushaw squash. Unlike the pumpkins commonly found in supermarkets today, Cushaw squash often grows in unusual shapes with curved necks and distinctive green and white stripes. It can become surprisingly large, sometimes weighing more than 20 pounds. For generations, farmers across the American South valued Cushaw for a very simple reason: it was dependable. Long before refrigeration, food security mattered enormously. A successful harvest could determine whether a family faced comfort or hardship during the winter months. The Cushaw squash proved especially useful because it stored well, produced large harvests, and adapted to southern growing conditions. Families could keep them for months after harvest. That made them incredibly valuable. As autumn arrived, farmhouses throughout the South often contained stacks of stored vegetables intended to last through the colder seasons. Among them were Cushaws. Eventually, creative cooks discovered that the flesh could be transformed into a surprisingly delicious dessert. Its flesh was naturally sweet and smooth when cooked, perfect for pies. The recipe itself looked familiar: cooked Cushaw squash, sugar, eggs, milk or cream, cinnamon, nutmeg, a flaky pie crust. Simple ingredients that most rural households already had available. Yet the flavor was slightly different from pumpkin pie. Many people described it as lighter, sweeter, and more delicate. In some communities, families strongly preferred it. Entire generations grew up believing that a proper autumn pie should be made from Cushaw rather than pumpkin. The dessert became especially popular throughout parts of Tennessee, Kentucky, Arkansas, Mississippi, and other southern states. For many families, it wasn't merely a holiday food. It appeared regularly whenever fresh Cushaw squash was available. Like many traditional Southern recipes, Cushaw pie reflected a culture built around self-sufficiency. Families relied heavily on what they could grow themselves. Store-bought ingredients were often limited. Transportation remained slow and expensive. As a result, local crops shaped local cuisine. People learned to make the most of whatever flourished nearby. And Cushaw flourished beautifully. As the 20th century progressed, however, America began changing. Large-scale agriculture expanded. National food companies grew more powerful. Supermarkets became common. Pumpkin products became easier to find. Advertising campaigns promoted pumpkin pie as the iconic American autumn dessert. Gradually, Cushaw pie began disappearing from public awareness. Many younger generations never learned the recipe. Some families stopped growing Cushaw squash altogether. What had once been a familiar Southern dessert slowly became a regional curiosity. Yet the pie never vanished completely. In rural communities throughout the South, family recipes continued passing from one generation to the next. Grandparents taught grandchildren. Old cookbooks preserved forgotten instructions. Local festivals celebrated heirloom crops and traditional foods. The memory survived. Today, interest in historic recipes has helped introduce a new audience to Cushaw pie.
Gardeners once again grow heirloom Cushaw squash. Food historians explore traditional Southern cooking, and people searching for forgotten flavors continue rediscovering recipes that nearly disappeared. Cushaw Pie reminds us that food history is often fragile. A recipe may feed families for centuries, then almost vanish within a few generations. Yet each forgotten dish tells a story, not only about ingredients, but about the people who planted them, harvested them, cooked them, and shared them around the family table. For countless Southern families, Cushaw Pie was once a cherished part of autumn, a symbol of harvest season, a reward after months of hard work, and a reminder that sometimes the most beloved foods are the ones history nearly forgot.
Few forgotten Southern foods sound stranger than red-eye gravy. In fact, many people hearing the name for the first time assume it must be some kind of joke. A gravy made from coffee? Poured over ham and biscuits? It hardly sounds like a recipe at all. Yet for generations, red-eye gravy was a familiar sight across much of the American South, particularly in farming communities where long days of physical labor demanded hearty breakfasts before sunrise. To understand the dish, we need to imagine a very different America. An America before fast food restaurants, before breakfast cereals, before refrigerators became common in every home. Most Southerners lived much closer to the land than people do today. Many families raised animals, grew crops, and prepared much of their food at home. Every ingredient mattered. Waste was unacceptable. When resources were limited, people learned to use everything available to them. Red-eye gravy emerged from that practical mindset. The dish usually began with country ham. Unlike modern supermarket ham, country ham was heavily salted and cured, allowing it to be stored for long periods without refrigeration. For generations, it served as an important source of protein throughout the South. A slice of country ham was often fried in a cast-iron skillet. As it cooked, flavorful drippings collected in the pan. Most people would simply discard them. Southern cooks saw opportunity. Instead of wasting those drippings, they added black coffee. The liquid quickly mixed with the salty residue left behind by the ham, creating a thin, dark sauce unlike almost any other gravy in American cooking. The result wasn't thick, it wasn't creamy, it didn't resemble the gravies most people know today. Instead, it possessed a bold combination of salty, smoky, and slightly bitter flavors. The kind of flavor that wakes a person up before a long day of work. Nobody knows exactly how the unusual name originated. Several stories exist. One popular explanation claims the layer of grease floating atop the dark liquid resembled a red eye staring back from the plate. Another story connects the name to exhausted travelers and farmers whose tired eyes appeared red after long hours of labor. Like many old food traditions, the true answer has likely been lost to time. What remains is the recipe itself and the people who relied on it. Red-eye gravy became especially popular among farmers, laborers, and working families. Breakfast often represented the most important meal of the day. Men and women could spend 10 or 12 hours working fields, tending livestock, or performing physically demanding tasks. A substantial breakfast was considered not a luxury, it was a necessity. Country ham, biscuits, red-eye gravy, coffee. Simple foods providing energy before sunrise. Meals designed for survival rather than elegance. As decades passed, Southern cuisine evolved. New ingredients became available. National food trends spread across the country. Many traditional dishes gradually disappeared.
Yet red-eye gravy endured, partly because it remained deeply connected to Southern identity. The recipe told a story of resourcefulness, a story of making something flavorful from ingredients that might otherwise have been wasted, a story of communities where practicality often mattered more than appearance. Even today, visitors traveling through parts of Tennessee, Kentucky, North Carolina, and other southern states occasionally encounter red-eye gravy on restaurant menus. For some families, it never disappeared at all. Recipes continue passing between generations, preserving a small piece of Southern history. And perhaps that is what makes red-eye gravy so fascinating. Not the coffee, not the ham, not even the unusual name, but the fact that such a simple recipe can reveal so much about the people who created it. People who worked hard, wasted little, and transformed ordinary ingredients into traditions that survived for generations. In a region famous for comfort food, barbecue, and biscuits, red-eye gravy remains one of the South's most unusual culinary survivors. A forgotten food that still tells the story of an older America every time it appears on the breakfast table. Of all the forgotten foods on this list, liver pudding may be the one that surprises modern Americans the most. The name alone is enough to make some people hesitate. For others, it brings back memories of grandparents, family farms, and breakfasts from a very different era. Today, liver pudding survives mostly in certain parts of the South, particularly in North Carolina and neighboring regions. But there was a time when foods like this were common throughout rural America. To understand why, we need to understand how people viewed food in the past. Modern supermarkets have changed the relationship many people have with food. If we need meat, we buy a package. If we need vegetables, we walk down another aisle. Most people rarely think about where those products originated. For much of American history, life worked differently. Families often raised their own animals, and when the time came for butchering, every part of the animal mattered. Waste was not simply discouraged, it could be dangerous. Food represented survival. Every usable piece had value. This philosophy became especially important across the rural South. Many families lived modestly. Money was often scarce. A harsh winter, poor harvest, or economic downturn could put enormous pressure on a household. Under those circumstances, wasting food made little sense. Liver pudding emerged from this practical way of thinking. The recipe varied from community to community, but it generally combined pork liver with cornmeal, seasonings, and other ingredients before being cooked into a loaf-like mixture. To modern ears, it may sound unusual. To earlier generations, it sounded sensible. The liver provided nutrition. Cornmeal stretched the ingredients further. Together, they created a filling food capable of feeding large families. And that was often the goal, not luxury, not elegance, simply making sure everyone had enough to eat. In many Southern households, the annual hog butchering season became one of the most important events of the year. Neighbors often helped one another. Families gathered together. Work began early and continued throughout the day. The entire process required cooperation, skill, and experience. When it ended, people preserved as much food as possible for the months ahead. Ham, bacon, sausage, fat, and products like liver pudding. Nothing useful was wasted. That mindset helped countless families survive difficult times. The Great Depression only reinforced these habits. Across America, millions struggled financially. In the South, many rural communities were already familiar with making the most of limited resources. Recipes passed down through generations suddenly became even more valuable. People knew how to stretch ingredients, they knew how to preserve food, and they knew how to create meals from parts others might ignore. Liver pudding fit naturally into that world. As America became wealthier during the 20th century, attitudes toward food gradually changed. Industrial agriculture expanded. Supermarkets offered greater variety. Consumers gained access to foods previous generations could only imagine. At the same time, many traditional recipes began disappearing. Some foods became associated with poverty. Others simply fell out of fashion. Liver pudding experienced both. Younger generations often preferred newer options. Family recipes were forgotten. Old traditions slowly faded. Yet the dish never disappeared entirely. In parts of North Carolina, liver pudding remains a source of regional pride. Local producers continue making it. Restaurants occasionally serve it. Families still pass recipes from one generation to the next. For many people, it represents more than food. It represents heritage, a connection to ancestors who lived through difficult circumstances and learned how to survive them. And perhaps that is the perfect way to end our journey through forgotten Southern foods. Because every dish we've explored today tells the same larger story, a story of resilience, a story of communities built through hard work, a story of families who transformed simple ingredients into meals capable of sustaining generations. These foods may not dominate modern menus. Some may seem unusual today. Others are remembered only in old cookbooks and family traditions. Yet each played a role in shaping Southern culture and daily life. They fed farmers before sunrise, comforted families during hardship, and brought communities together around the dinner table. In many ways, these forgotten foods helped build America. And while the recipes may continue to change, the stories behind them deserve to be remembered.